This is all theater. This is all just political theater.
Political theater. Political theater.
Pure political
Theater.
Theater.
Political theater.
The
Nefarious.
Significant and protracted.
political
theater for political theater's sake.
I yield back.
From Washington, this is Political Theater, Roll Call's review of the spectacle of politics on Capitol Hill and across the country. I'm Jason Dick. During our last podcast here on Political Theater, we discussed the top political news stories of the year with Nathan Gonzalez and pondered whether any of them would be relevant in, say, 50 years. We called it The View from 2073. For this episode of Political Theater, I wanted to drill down a little bit more local. And for that, we're going to talk to Brandon Wetherbee. He's the editor and publisher of Recommend If You Like, and a good friend and a frequent podcast guest. I've been on his podcast, You Meet Them Everybody. He's been on this podcast several times, and welcome him back for this edition. Brandon, hello.
Hello. How are you?
Good. This is your first time doing the video, so thank you for being a part of this continuing evolution of this podcast.
That's what people want to see.
That's
they want
what
to see people talking into microphones.
Right. and older people too, middle-aged people.
Yeah, that's what they want.
We have to give the people what they want. So as I mentioned, this is the year of sort of best of things. For instance, I just sent you sort of a kind of best of story for your site, Recommend If You Like, about the best best repertory movies that I saw on big screens this past year. And I kind of like doing just the off-centered best of list. And for this, I just think that you're a good person to talk to about this because one of your own publication, which focuses on the culture in the DC area and events, music, bands, movies, books, sports, and also because I think that you're one of the more acute observers of Washington because while you've lived here for a while, you're also a native Chicagoan. Mm-hmm. You love Chicago and all things Chicago. It is your real home, and so you have a view of what another big city is like and how it functions and what's going on. So, thanks for doing this because I think that this could be a good conversation.
I hope.
Yeah, me too. So let's talk. Some of the more significant sort of local stories. These are going to be a little bit more cultural, more sports oriented. But I do want to get into some of the some local issues that have resonance in everybody's lives who lives in Washington. But let's start with the pandas.
Sure. Significant
or not significant that the pandas for the first time in 50 years, we don't have pandas at the National Zoo. This happened. The Chinese government withdrew our panda friends. We might get another batch at some point, but this feels kind of big, at least if you have kids and like to go to the zoo.
It's really only important if you care about democracy in any way. But if you don't, they're just the red pandas number one are better than the regular pandas. So, and we still have Rusty. So whatever, I don't care about this. And in terms of the kid stuff, the pandas are always like maybe top 10 visits to the zoo. Like the pandas kind of suck. Like the pandas are the most overrated. Like they're not even the best bear at the zoo, let alone the best panda at the zoo. Number one thing for kids at the zoo is the carousel. That ain't going nowhere. That's made of wood. Number two is probably the lions because they're loud. Then number three is the Adrian bears because they could actually see them. Mm-hmm. Then the elephants. So no, the pandas, the biggest marketing gimmick. It's brilliant. I'm glad that the zoo did it. But overall, I don't care as an animal lover, but I do care that because I'm pro-democracy. So yeah, that's not a good sign. This is a PR thing, and everything's a PR thing. So the fact that there's the Ukraine vote this week, or the funding vote this week, maybe next year, whatever, that relates to this, and that's not a good sign.
So please explain, about that.
I just sound like a red thread guy, but I'm not.
Not at all. No, this is why I had you on.
The pandas were always a loan from China. Right. China has a really, really good relationship with Russia compared to our relationship with Russia, right?
Right.
China's not funding the war in Ukraine, correct?
Correct.
We are, right?
Correct.
The Russians also funded I don't know, one of the two political parties that doesn't want to fund the war in Ukraine. Is that right? Or is that still a controversial statement? I don't know.
I mean, I'll let it lie there. I mean, like they certainly are happy with the growing isolationism of the Republican Party.
So that's why the pandas are a big deal. It has nothing to do with furry creatures. It has nothing to do with the environment. Both countries are bad in terms of their records on the environment, both China and the United States. So the pandas are a huge deal, and it has nothing to do with the animals. And I'm not going to be telling any of my children any of that until they're a little bit older.
Do you anticipate getting questions about where they are? If
no, they don't care about the pandas because I get to control. I'm the curator of that museum. I don't get to control. Okay. I was more bummed out when they closed the mini aquarium because now I have to go to Baltimore to see the fishies. And that aquarium, well, amazing, is a far aquarium, and it's not free, unlike all the Smithsonian. So that's my big old man complaint. I like the octopus.
I mean, who doesn't? Who doesn't? They're very intelligent creatures. They have
That's
sense
why they're delicious.
Yeah, and they taste good. Okay, next thing.
I hope this is helpful.
I mean, is any of this helpful? I mean,
honestly, I've been thinking about more and more what you do, what I do, what our people and our lives do, and I think I'm not trying to negate what you do. I think what I do is the most important because you deal with things that are actually important. But you're all more depressed than me because you can't win in politics. But if you cover non-politics, you can because you're trying to find the things that fight against the darkness. Well, you just are engaged in the darkness and at one point had hope. Where people like me, we never had any hope. So it's nice and fun to see oh, look at the pretty Christmas lights. Let's go walk around and see those. Where you're stuck in a building around people that spend 300 plus days a year trying to raise money. That's depressing.
It is depressing, and also I would
I've lost everyone. I am so sorry.
Not at all. I mean, I would also add to that the reason that what you do is important is that the reason that we have a political system is to safeguard people's ability to enjoy life and enjoy their culture.
So maybe I should stop talking about how one half of them get all their money from Russia. That's not a good thing to do. That's a bad idea. I'm shooting myself in the foot consistently. For 20 years, I have not learned one lesson.
Well, I would take issue with that. I think that
I respectfully disagree. I was the editor of my high school newspaper, right? This is more than 20 years ago at this point. Catholic school. This is when Dogma was in theaters and stuff like that. I put a picture of Buddy Jesus with the thumbs up in the Catholic newspaper. And they said, you can't do that. And I go, it's free press. It's free speech. And I go, it's not. You're at a Catholic school, dude. And they were right. And I was wrong. And I've learned nothing from that. I really hope I don't make billionaire Jeff angry. And then they won't take my pitches at the Post anymore. That'll be bad.
That would be, I mean, an entire podcast just on Dogma would actually,
I think Kevin Smith's done 4,000 hours on that. It's got a whole podcast network based on that.
It's true. And I'm not even Catholic. Although I went to Catholic school for 1 year in high school.
I'm not Catholic. I went to Catholic school my entire education, pre-K through college.
There we go. I mean, and look where it got you. Here on a podcast. All right, next item, significant or insignificant, big or not so big news. The sale of the Washington Commanders by Dan Snyder to a group led by Josh Harris.
I think it's going to be the biggest story, hopefully, of the decade if the Commanders don't move back. I don't see the recent Caps Wizards potential move to Virginia being a big deal, even if it does happen.
We'll get to that.
Understood. I'm not trying to step on any toes here. I still think this will be the bigger story unless the stadium goes back to RFK or DC proper, but this will be related to that. So this is no different than when the Cubs got Theo Epstein to be the GM or the president of baseball operations. And that wasn't the year they won the World Series, but do they win the World Series without that happening? Probably not. Do the Commanders ever have a chance at a winning culture, at a non-toxic culture without the sale to Josh Harris? Probably not.
Right.
So this is going to be huge. Even this year was a wash, and no matter what happened, the fact that they won their first game was just beyond joyful. No one cares. No one, but the majority of the people that are mad that the stadium isn't good are still okay with the ownership. And that's a huge disconnect. We no longer have the worst owner in sports in in the DMV. So that's huge. It's a wonderful, wonderful story. And I've talked about this a lot with a couple of pals. We've written about it on Recommend if you like. I think that the pandemic was the greatest thing that could have happened to the NFL because baseball screwed up so royally, no pun intended. And basketball did their darndest and took it so seriously. It was off-putting to a lot of people, which I thought the bubble was amazing. It was the best basketball played maybe in my lifetime. And hockey did a really great job too, but they took it very seriously. Half the country doesn't think it's serious, right? Football was perfect because if you wanted to take it seriously, you could say, "Oh, well, there's no fans. It's safe and it's outside. It's safe." And if you didn't want to take it seriously, go, the game must go on. It's going to be played. They never missed a week. That's huge. They've done such a good job with that. People almost forget about Kaepernick. People almost forget about CTE because that's how good of a job the NFL did. This is a continuation of that. This is just another, like a 4-year chunk of like NFL victories. And if you look at the ratings and if you look at Taylor Swift of it all, they can seemingly do no wrong. And I'd say about a decade ago, I'd put money that this would be the first league to like fail or dramatically change in order to sustain itself. So yeah, they've done a great job, and I don't know what ownership needed to do to finally force this dude out, but it's nice to know that evil human beings get paid $6.5 million, $6.5 billion because they were horrible owners for 20 years. So
And then
another positive story.
walked away from the region, walked away from
Got it off in a region because there's multiple reasons to go away. Anyways,
would your smart money be on them relocating into DC and they like say the old RFK site or something?
they should, and I'm not one of those people that thinks that that city should pay for this thing, but there are 3 reasons why I think it should belong to the RFK. Number 1, the footprint is there; they could easily do this. Number 2, Taylor Swift didn't visit this market on her tour. That was the biggest grossing tour in the world. There was no DMV stop. That's because the Commander Stadium is so poor. The Beyonce dates, one of the 2 at that show got rained out, and there was like a flood within the stadium. If the 2 biggest shows, the 2 biggest football stadium size shows, either are getting flooded or not visiting the DMV because of this, if you can guarantee 12 events that bring a football level product, obviously for football, there's 8 plus the 2 preseason, sometimes 9 based on the new 17 game schedule. If you can guarantee 4 more events to that caliber, it will pay for itself. That sounds insane, but it will. And there needs to be no development other than the vacant RFK. So yeah, they should come back. And once again, I don't like the Commanders. I like them a hell of a lot more than I did 5 years ago. But like, I'm not a Commanders fan. I probably never go to that stadium. I'm a Bears fan, and I could have got relatively free tickets, but I don't want to commute to Landover and back on a Monday night. That sounds like pain, and I'm not doing that.
Right.
So I sound so old and bitter. Not bitter.
No. I mean, again, give the people what they want, right? I mean, that's
not
like,
this.
That's a pretty good chunk of podcasting. I mean, this is you've listened to Kornheiser, I'm sure, right?
I like Kornheiser. I don't think Kornheiser's bitter.
I love him. He does sound very angry though sometimes.
Yeah, I get that. I think he sounds happy now.
I mean, it's probably happier than
Maybe it's just compared to like his. I don't like Stephen A. Smith, which is sacrilege to say. So maybe that's it.
Yeah. Since you mentioned the Wizards and Caps, Commonwealth of Virginia has put together a package to lure the Wizards and the Caps to a site near the Potomac, the new Potomac Yards Metro Station. It's over, across the river in Alexandria from Washington D.C. Just to basically, down the road from National Airport. And this, to me, it sounds serious because they're offering like a lot of incentives, a lot of cash. They would be able to have the practice facilities at the facility itself, which the Capital One Center, which is where the Wizards and Capitals play now, doesn't have. The Wizards go across the river to a practice facility in Anacostia, where the Mystics and the Go-Go play, and the Capitals have to go out to Ballston for their practices in a mall, which is I don't know, it's kind of charming at the same time too. I know that it's not fun. They'd rather do it all in one spot. Ted Leonis, the owner of both franchises, has asked the District of Columbia to pay for hundreds of millions of dollars in renovations for the Capital One Center. So far the city has not said yes, and so there's a real chance that the Wizards and Capitals might leave after 25 years, 26 years now. I guess we're in their 26th year. After being at this facility, they were previously out in Landover again, in the Prince George's County and the Capital Ones, or the Capital Center at that point that Abe Holland had built. And talk about another drag. I mean, like this would be a little more accessible than that. There's a metro obviously stop there, and it's pretty close in. But it seems like this is a fairly big deal too in terms of the downtown. I mean, just the other night, the Rangers were in town, lots of hockey jerseys for both Washington and New York. The restaurants are hopping. I mean, Jose Andres, number one Capitals fan, and has 4 or 5 restaurants or whatever in the immediate vicinity. It feels, I mean, there's a lot of other things in downtown DC, but losing 82 games between the Caps and Wizards a year seems like a lot.
Oh yeah, it's huge. But there's a huge difference between getting to Alexandria than it is to Landover. So if it does happen, it's going to be not good, but I don't think it's going to be as big as the Commanders moving back for 8 games a year, which says something about both sports, all 3 sports actually. I love where the Wizards and Caps play. I think it's probably the second best stadium location in the country. Madison Square Garden is probably number 1 because it's that close. Like, you can get there from pretty much anywhere. Parking is a nightmare, and I've never driven to that stadium, and that's a luxury because I live in the city. But that's a city versus suburb bias that I'm always going to have, and I'm always going to be pro city. So
it won't have. I mean, they'll have a metro stop there, but it is like one stop removed from Metro Center. So it has all these lines going through it. It's very easy, as you said, to get there or to bike there or walk there. For
it's
some people.
Wonderful. It's close to perfect. It's not perfect. It's close to perfect. And I understand. This sounds like an old man. It's really not. The stadium was, I think, in perfect condition, and the area around it maybe 8 years ago. And then since the pandemic, that area around the stadium has dramatically changed for bad reasons. And there's no way around that. And I don't think that whitewashing it, this is essentially an Atlanta Braves move.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're going to just move it just outside the city and make it where you kind of would prefer to drive, which is a bad look. And you're going to isolate the people that actually live in the city.
Right.
But you might be super happy with the facilities. It's the exact same plan the Atlanta Braves did. And it really stinks because then they won a World Series.
Right.
And you're not really going to feel like the Wizards are losing. We're losing the Wizards when you're going to be the worst team in the league and you have no faith in ownership to do anything good with draft picks. And at this point, the Caps only exist for the Russian guy to get Putin's friend to get more goals. So, like, yeah, this is the worst time in the last 20 years for both franchises in terms of like on ice and on court product. Yeah, this is the time to move. And I hope it doesn't happen. I don't care if it really does, though, because I'm a Blackhawks and Bulls guy. I'll still go those 2 games a year, and that's about it. As long as baseball doesn't move, I could almost care less, because the good thing about it being on the train line is, in theory, every worker will be able to keep their job. And if you really want to go to a game enough, it's going to be 15 more minutes of time on the train, maybe.
One of the questions I have, though, is that, like, I don't go to a lot of Wizards games, but every time I do go, I'm kind of reminded that Washington is a basketball capital, in particular, like Prince George's County, the other side of the district line, in Maryland. The people forget, I think, sometimes because the on-court product is so bad now, that the Bullets, won when the Wizards were the Bullets, they won an NBA championship. They went to another NBA championship.
Yeah, but they didn't win it in that building.
It's true. They didn't.
So yes,
but
they have the. But
it's also, but it feels like it's kind of, again, like you said with the Braves. I mean, they moved out of Atlanta. They moved to Cobb County. And they're in, as Barry Sverla points out in the Post in his column, uh, it's just this generic, you know, super yuppie brewing company,
Oh yeah.
generic hamburger stand lot,
And that's why if the Commanders move back to RFK, I'm okay for it, because you're not creating this false suburb or this false town where what this Alexandria thing is.
Right.
Once again, not a fan of it, but also this is another weird thing. For basketball and hockey, it's not an outdoor sport. So the building and the ice is the same and the court is the same. They're almost interchangeable for where you play. And anyone that grew up playing it, those aren't places like you go down to your local field. No, you're going everywhere from a young age traveling to play both of those sports. So in a weird way, of all four to move potentially, those are the two I care the least about. I still want it to happen. I don't want it to happen. I like Capital One. I don't know the reason they want to upgrade it other than to get more boxes in there so you can make more money, which is fair. I mean, that's why you own a team, is to bleed the public, right?
I mean, what one would hope that the owner, who seems to be invested in the area, I mean, he's not some out of towner, would recognize that this is, and the city also, would recognize that this is a gathering spot for everybody in the area.
It is, and you know what? They do an
Centralized
amazing job with concerts. You could probably, without those two teams, you probably bring more Georgetown games there. You probably bring more concerts there. You're not going to get 82, but you could probably do another 20 or 30 or 40. Maybe a lot of those acts that would play Meriwether in the summer would play Capital One. Maybe it's not a wash, but it will be used,
right?
Hopefully.
So I think this also, this is a good transition to some of the underlying reasons that, I mean, you mentioned that the area around the Capital One Center has deteriorated. Like when it opened, when I moved here, it was, downtown was not a great place to be. I mean, I remember I went to a Wizards game and I parked in a dirt lot just to the north of what was then the MCI Center. Of course, that's now like a Vita Fitness or or something like that. But over the last few years, a lot of retailers have gone out of business. Some of this is the pandemic. Some of it is just the normal business cycle. People are on 10-year or 20-year leases and they just cycle out and nothing replaces them. But this is also something that we're seeing in other parts of the city that were, again, sort of previously vibrant, like H Street. H Street is becoming a less desirable place to visit and to do business. I mean, people are closing their restaurants, closing their businesses, and literally saying it's because of crime.
Sure.
And so this, I mean, granted, this gets into sort of politics because, crime becomes a political issue very quickly. It's certainly, a charge that's leveled at the District of Columbia for having crime be out of control. How much is that? I mean, other cities are going through this, but other cities also don't have all these people from other Congress here putting a magnifying glass. I think the only other city that gets as much attention, it seems to me, are San Francisco, because of some high profile, sort of pullouts of businesses. LA, primarily because it's more of a homeless issue there. The homeless, population is very large in Los Angeles, and then in New York. Because everything's about New York all the time. I mean, it's certainly crime in Chicago. This was a leading, factor in the mayoral contest. But how big of a deal is it here? And is this just this just seems to be kind of a quality of life issue for people who work in Capitol Hill and people who are just working neighborhoods like you.
Yeah, but no one. Yes, you're right, and I agree with almost everything you said on the premise of that, except you said it's like half the pandemic and half just like leases running out. I'd say like 95% pandemic, because that I can't think of one instance where that didn't play into some of this. And even if you're in the neighborhoods, the pandemic is still the reason why it's okay. It's easier to replace one thing with one thing than one thing with 30 things. That's a horrible analogy. There's a lot of vacancies, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of places to fill.
Yeah.
Places to fill that were full in 2019 that don't exist in 2023. I think it's fair to say, like, oh yeah, it's because like half the workforce is gone. That being said, yeah, the half the workforce doesn't need to be there. Both things can be true. It's time to adapt. That's tough. Yeah, I think that's all of it. I don't think it's complicated in any way, and and it sounds dismissive. It really, really isn't. But I remember early days of the pandemic when, like, if you're a 17-year-old high schooler that all of a sudden was in something for 10 hours a day to nothing, why do you think the the car thefts increased by like all teenagers? But like tenfold, because there was nothing to do and you had a thing to do, and that really hasn't been fully replaced yet. That's not a good sign.
Yeah. No, I don't know what to think of this. So, like, for another example of something leaving, and this is not crime related, it's more business related, like the it's business cycle related, is that the Hotel Harrington,
Yes.
which is near my workplace here in downtown DC,
Sure.
it closes today as we're recording this. It's this last day. Its bar, Harry's Bar, closed earlier in the month. That gained a lot of notoriety, for being a gathering place for the Proud Boys during the 2020 election cycle and its aftermath. But it was also home to two other restaurants, Harriet's, which is a place that I think we may have gone there after like a 5K or something like that. On the mall.
You and me have talked about this place for 13 years, and I've wanted to go with you. Like for about a decade, and then the Proud Boys went there. I'm like, I'm good. I don't need to see a thing that at one point looked charming.
Yeah, and I mean, it is like it is kind of unfortunate. I mean, the Post, this is not a commercial for the Washington Post, but they did do a nice sort of wrap up of it. That this, that's it sort of became to define a lot of what it was about Harry's Bar over the last few years. But that was it's a relatively small episode of a long, the long history of the establishment. It was a dive bar. I remember going there a few times, and it wouldn't have been out of place in like my hometown,
Sure.
Cottonwood, like sort of mediocre food, but also affordable, and, just a place that everybody, was kind of welcome, and maybe they were perhaps too welcoming to the Proud Boys. But then also, what do you do? Like
we don't serve your kind here, Proud Boy. Like, it's not complicated.
It can be a little more complicated when you're worried, when again you're in a pandemic and people just sort of start showing up, and then who do you ask for ID?
Yes,
you're not going to
legally have to. It's a
bar. I meant for Proud Boy, like, here, we're not going to
fake. Okay, most every bar now you could fake a scanner. Just take a photo of every single ID. It's not hard. I worked as a doorman. This isn't hard.
It's not. I guess, the thing that I worry about with that is that, and again, I'm not being an apologist, obviously, for the Proud Boys, but how do you?
Says the man from Arizona.
But at what point do what is the guide for, like, okay, that guy's got a camo hat, so he's not welcome here? I mean, like,
are you a Proud Boy? All guys in matching polos.
All right, but
we're closed
again. I don't want to.
We're closed. Go to the W. Here, that's how you do it.
My point about this establishment is that it's been there for 109 years, continuously run. The last, owner died, of it. The grandson of one of the founders died in 2020. So, I mean, it was, and it also is this anomaly, right? It's an old structure built in, the 19 teens, that was just a matter of time before it was replaced by one of these soulless, ugly glass and steel things that dot the landscape in DC. And it was, I mean, that's one of the reasons I kind of rooted for it, because it was a place that didn't quite fit in. It was a place that wasn't just like everywhere else. And now it's gone, and it will be replaced by luxury condos and like, I think the real estate evaluation of just the real estate, nothing to do with the actual building itself, was like $25 million or something like that. I mean, it was, so it's going to be replaced by something that, sucks, I mean, to be, charitable about it. And there's just like, it seems like there's one thing kind of after another of that. What replaces these things? Like, what replaces things that are actually tied to the community? If the Wizards and Capitals, homegrown, sports franchises go to Alexandria, Hotel Harrington.
Well, are you a homegrown sports franchise if you also were in Baltimore?
I mean, isn't everybody from somewhere else at some point? I mean,
No, the
like,
Chicago Bulls have always been the Chicago Bulls. Some
okay.
franchises move. So that's
We,
the
we
thing
are
about
talking 50 years. I mean,
but
like
that's the
that.
point though. That's the thing. Like it's hard to develop these super tight connections with any franchise when there's movement every 20 to 30 years. It's not
But
a bad thing, it's not a good thing, but like that's what happened to the Bullets / Wizards, you know what I mean?
But it hasn't been 20 to 30 years with the Wizards. I mean,
Yeah, but the
they've
current
been,
building it has.
no. I mean, I would argue also that the name. I mean, I understand why there was a move to change the name from the Bullets to the Wizards. The Wizards is among the worst names in sports.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, it's one of the dumbest names. Like the uniforms are terrible.
The only good outcome for this can't even happen, which should be a Wizards Magic finals, but they're in the same conference. So I guess the Eastern Conference would be good. Because that's a fun thing. Wizards use Magic.
Right. There we go.
Yeah, they're horrible names. Anyways, it's interesting that we're talking about Harrington because it's a downtown place and downtown is plagued by crime, yet the building's worth $25 million. There's this huge disconnect now of rampant crime stories, but also the rents are out of control. It's both, right? It's interesting.
And I wonder, I mean, that to me explains a lot of people's sort of displeasure with all politicians, but, particularly, I mean, people are like, well, the economy seems to be rebounding. Why do people not like Biden? It's like, it's because everybody is feeling stressed, from many different angles. I mean, like inflation may be coming down, but that doesn't make it any more likely that somebody who's 22 and just getting out of college can think about owning a house anytime in the next 10 to 20 years.
Yeah.
Or even buying a car or I mean, things feel unaffordable. Things feel a little unsafe. And then there's, I mean, again, this is going to sound like,
are you going to talk about a city on a shining hill any second?
No, I'm going to talk about, I'm going to do an old man thing myself and complain about my parking ticket lately. I mean, I screwed up the days on I went to go get something to eat on a Saturday, the Saturday after Thanksgiving, and I parked my car and it said loading zone. I'm like, oh, I'm fine. It's Sunday because you can't park here on Saturday. I was within 10 minutes. I got a $100 parking ticket. I mean, again, a $100 parking ticket. And again, my fault. I screwed up the days. I should have been, less hazy, in the post Thanksgiving thing. So, just this brutal efficiency with which parking tickets and moving violations, which are, like they use, robot cameras to take, like if you go over the speed limit or now if you make a U-turn where you're not supposed to. I mean, like there is just this amazing efficiency with doling out like very expensive tickets. And yet like we're, nobody seems to pay a fare on Metro anymore. No, like there are roving bands of gangs who just go into CVS's and Walgreens and clear out the shelves, and like it's just like we can't do anything about it. We just can't. There's just the sense of like helplessness with like quality of life issues like that, and it's just. And then on the other hand, you get $100 parking ticket, and it's just like this sucks.
I agree that it sucks to get $100 parking ticket. I also think it's both good and bad that cops don't chase anybody or pull anybody over seemingly in the city because when they're speeding, because it's illegal to like to participate in a chase.
I see cops like going like bats out of hell all the time.
But if it's like a stolen car or robbery situation, they can't do it, and there's a helicopter, and that's good because it saves pedestrian lives. It stinks that the helicopters cost a lot of money. And the robot cameras are ruthless and horrible, and that's horrible. I agree, but it also prevents a little bit less racial profiling, so that's good. Also, I agree. All public transportation should be free. So if kudos to the kids jumping the rail. Seriously, like I'm too old to do that and get away with it. Good for them. It should be free. Let's make it free. The money's there. They're not shutting down the trains because the 10 teens jump the rail.
I don't think that I also don't think that they're jumping the fare because they don't have the money. They're doing it because they know that they won't get caught.
As they should. Take advantage of it. I completely disagree with you on this.
This is where society literally breaks down, though, when people think that they don't have to follow any rules, any semblance of it. I mean, like this is like Costanza moment. We're living in a society.
respectfully, once again, disagree.
We're not living in a society.
It's all society, bro. This is to think that that's actually the problem is kind of the point of the Russian stuff. That when I get back to the China stuff, if we look at it at a situation, okay, like it's not about if you have the money, it's about whether or not you should pay. Well, why should you pay, right? Why should you pay for this good? Did you pay for this good because that's what it costs? Because for $225 or $380 or whatever it takes to get from part A to point B in the city, that's how it should be, right? Or you just make it a flat fee. You should make it $2 and you just have a cop there at the gate. That's it. That's how you solve this. You put one cop at one station. That's all they do. No more, less guns, less armor, more people just walking around. That's it. No guns, just tasers. Like, it's not complicated. Don't arrest a kid. Give him a $30 fine or $20 fine or whatever. It goes away. Stuff like that. That's what's going to make any of this stop. Just plainclothes policemen. Just walking
Is
policemen.
that going to happen though with
No!
the District of Columbia? That's my thing.
It's not going to happen anywhere because it's a lot easier to get approved for budgets of militarization than it is to get guys with they just need more comfortable walking shoes. That's all this really is about. It's not going to happen. It's depressing. I don't think that the kid that's jumping the rail is the same in any way as the billionaire sports owner asking for a handout. The billionaire sports owner is hundreds of times of magnitude more evil. Ted is way more evil than all the kids put together jumping on the train. But we talk like Ted, like, oh, he's a local. He's a good guy. No, Ted's the most evil out of any. Jeff's pretty evil too. Don't get me wrong. All the guys are evil. All the billionaires are evil. What they're getting in handouts, magnitudes more than the kids. And we live in a society, Jerry, is an easy way to push the people down below you in the socioeconomic stratum. That's all this is.
I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I can handle billionaires actually paying their fair share of taxes, and I do think
the train should be free.
Yeah.
Good job on the kids.
Yes. So where do you see we're going, here? I mean, like we've brought up a lot of gloom, but is there any path, sort of out of this? Because I mean, again, everything changes. I mean,
or conversely, nothing changes, and both are beautiful.
We feel like I feel like we can take it for granted that things are changing now. I mean, is my guess. I mean, if nothing else, I mean, we've gotten changes of ownership or things like that, or things closing.
Oh, a different billionaire owns a thing that we like for no specific reason.
But what's next? I mean, like, what does happen that makes it a little bit more livable for a place like Washington, and we get people to stop complaining about the way we run things.
Stop complaining. Well, the entire podcast industry folds. Okay, so a few things. We initially were not going to talk about this. Remember this? We were initially going to talk about not DC. We're going to talk about big picture stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that was the original, and I thought it was just a little bit amorphous.
I understand that completely, but what we didn't talk about, which I think is super important to DC, but a national story, is the Elon Musk of it all, is the Twitter of it all, because you and me and most everyone in our circle at one point or another has either been on Twitter or lived on Twitter,
right?
And that seems to be going away. And
yep.
It's not necessarily a good thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a different thing. We're kind of retreated into our own bubbles. So there's the Blue Sky bubble, there's the Threads bubble, there's still the Twitter bubble. None of them are really taking over. Everyone that says I'm not on Twitter anymore is still on Twitter.
Right.
If everyone that thinks Threads is good is the same people that did Facebook, and Russia won on that one again. So nothing's new and nothing's old at the exact same time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, and I feel like social media is now going kind of the way we saw television evolve. Initially there were just a few options, and everybody saw the same thing. Everybody had experienced it at the same time, and then it fragmented, and we ended.
There's no more monoculture.
Yeah, we ended up with 500 channels that.
And now there's TikTok, and every single person has their own channel,
right?
Which is both horrible and wonderful at the exact same time. Have you ever heard of The Devil Never Sleeps? It's this newish book by Juliet Kaim.
No.
She was the person that did the Atlantic piece and early March of 2020 being like, this is going to be bad. It's essentially a book about like how every disaster unfolded, right? And about how we currently live in a like disaster state.
Mhm.
And that's kind of what you've been getting at with all this stuff. But I still think this disaster state is way better than it was 200 years ago in this country for everyone.
Yeah.
I think it's better than it was 100 years ago for most people of color. I think it was better than it has been 50 years ago for most every LGBTQ or identified person now. So, while this is still not great, it's still immensely better than it was 50 years ago. Because I listened to your show about 2073. I think that what we're going to notice about now, that when we look back on now, this is going to be the time where we really do get, everyone gets their own little feed of media that's changed everything. It'll be very, very fascinating to see how that translates to the IRL world, because this is a good example about local stuff, right? DC9 is one of my favorite bars, clubs, rock venues, whatever you want to call it, in Washington, DC, right? The room is like 200 people. There's a bar, there's a roof. They'll have a show and there's like a TikTok star and they have like 65 million views or whatever, and they sell 0 tickets. And there's a band that's not on TikTok that's got a local following and they'll sell like 40, and that's like old school. And then there's a touring band that's been doing it forever and they pound the pavement and they'll sell out. And that's how it's been forever. So it's this wonderful mixture of like, even though there's this brand new ecosystem, it's not really going to impact every single aspect of life. But if you want to live in that bubble and pretend you're someone huge or popular or not, and retreat into your bubble and find safety in that, there's that new option. And that's great. That could also be evil, but that in theory could be great. So I think it's a wash. And when the disaster book and the Elon Musk of it all and the AI of it all just makes me think that none of this is complicated. This all goes back to Mr. Rogers, and we just need to be kind to each other, and that's it. And it's so hard to be kind to each other when the algorithm doesn't promote that, because it's boring. It's so boring. It's so difficult to say it's you I like versus of like, hey, because you just wrote about Tenet. Hey, hear this mystery on a mystery. It's a mystery. It's not complicated. Are you cool? Are you cool, man? Why couldn't they kick out the Proud Boys, man? They weren't cool at the Harrington. Maybe the Harrington stays open because they just weren't cool. And now people got hurt because of that. They just weren't cool, man. It goes back to the same thing it's always been. There's always going to be evil billionaires trying to manipulate things, and they're all going to suck. And I shouldn't say that because I believe in Mr. Rogers, and you shouldn't say people suck. But come on, dude. So that's where we're at. That's how it's always going to be. It's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It is a thing.
I'll take that. I mean, yeah. No, I will. I mean, I actually was looking for some sort of. I mean, I can get fairly gloomy, and so
I don't agree with Mr. Rogers' personal politics. I don't agree with his church's stance on most everything. I don't agree with his track record in terms of his decisions in life. I agree with every single thing he preaches, and I try to do that in a way that's progressive, and it's very difficult, and I'm trying. And I think that the majority of people in your life are trying to, and that's a good thing to think about. And if you ever get super duper depressed about it, you live in a city, and isn't that cool? Because you get to get medicine if you need it real quickly, and you get to have food from around the world whenever you want that you couldn't have gotten even 50 years ago. Isn't that great? You could have every spice in the world, and people used to murder each other for those things. That's pretty fun. And you have the opportunity to turn off all the garbage you don't like. Isn't that cool? That's not how it's always been. It's a wonderful time.
I think we're going to wrap it on that. That's a good note to end on. And like I said, I'll take it. I'll take that. Brandon, thank you so much, for coming on, and happy holidays to you. And we will see you another time here on Political Theater.
Thank you.